if you can see me, you'll see that I am sitting with two Abunas or two priests. But in truth, only one of them is a real Abuna and the other one is an actor. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, then you have not yet seen the new series Abouna on YouTube and you're falling behind. What are you doing? After this episode, what you got to do is go to YouTube and search Abouna and watch this new awesome series. Today we have with us Andrew Isaac, the star and actor and the brain and the producer and the production behind this new awesome series. We have him with us today because we are very interested in his research and in him as a person and everything that he's learned while putting together this series. And we're so excited to have a conversation about it and about culture and about faith and about spirituality. So if you're tuning in, thank you for coming in, and please help me welcome our new guest, Andrew Isaac, with my beloved and my good friend, Father Elijah, the real priest in this conversation.
That was very
What's up,
nice.
guys? Thank you.
That was a really great intro. I'm really glad that you've taken over intros
No,
since
no, I have not
since
taken over. I'm only doing it, periodically.
but honestly, I think I really have to give you kudos because you've taken our intros to a new level. It used to
Thank you.
just be welcome to another episode of the Reintroduction podcast. I'm your
Right.
host.
Yeah,
But
because anytime if you listen to the first 15 seconds of any episode, you wouldn't know which episode you're listening to.
you're 100% right. That's what I'm saying. Thank you, Mina, for enhancing us and bringing us to a new level of quality podcasting. And you
Right.
can
And
tell
as
just you
and as
can
much
tell.
as I would like to make this about me today, I will have to, to redirect the conversation back to Andrew.
We
Andrew,
should
thank you
talk
so much.
about we should talk about what we were talking about right before we went on, which is last names and how you pronounce. Yeah. I was just arguing with Andrew, saying his name is Ishak or Ishak,
Mhm.
and he said no. I pronounce it as Isaac. I was like, come on, man. No, well, he said Ishak, and I said I say Isaac. We didn't get to the correct pronunciation yet,
Mhm.
That's true.
Right.
but to me, I actually was trying to split the difference. I'm Ishak is very American.
Mhm.
Isaac
Mhm.
Right.
Right.
is at least the translation. So
Mhm.
I try to split the difference. But when I was in high school, my brother said to me, "You're pronouncing your name wrong. It's supposed to be Isaac, not Ishak." I was like, I don't know how I pronounce my own name. So Yeah.
You've completely adopted a new culture in how you pronounce your
Yeah.
name,
Yeah.
and you have foregone the former culture, which is something that we should talk about today. That's for sure part of this
Yeah,
conversation.
absolutely.
But today we have Andrew, great guy, professor, Santa Clara University, California, professor of communications. But he's done some research when it comes to bomb squads and wildlife fires, which I don't know how they come. How does that deal with communication? So Andrew, tell us a little bit more about
Sure,
that.
absolutely. I'm really well, I'll tell you some of my passions are I care about the church very much. I also really love sports. So in grad school, when I asked my advisor, I want to study sports teams, he said, don't study sports because you'll be seen as a guy some former athlete who wants to keep his sports career alive. So I found something similar to sports. Um, Wildfire crews, emergency medical units, they operate the same way. They have to communicate quite a bit before they do their work so that they can do their work appropriately in the moment. They don't have a chance to re-communicate or redo their work. So I was really interested in how those teams communicate beforehand so that they communicate better in the moment. That's how I ended up doing that for about 10 years.
That
That's
is
super
very
cool.
cool. Yeah,
Yeah, I enjoyed it.
for
Learned a
10
lot.
years.
Yeah, I mean, I started in 2008, 2009. And
That's
I
awesome.
probably, when I started this project, I kind of slowed down on the other stuff.
Yeah. And you've also done some work on culture.
Yeah, yeah. Actually, I made a documentary about the Coptic Church about 16 years ago, about the culture of the church. I can't watch it anymore because I feel like uh, it's so not good. There's another way to put it. I watch it and I go, I don't know
Is
about
it is it not good from a production standpoint or
yeah.
from content
No, I think
standpoint?
the content's good. I mean, I followed a couple stories. I followed my wife joining the church. I followed my friend Rohan, who also, he's Indian and his experience becoming part of the church. I followed our church trying to build a new sanctuary and just touched on different elements of what the culture is like and how that affects how we live as Coptic Americans. Um, that was something that, yeah, again, 16 years ago, I watch it now and I cringe at some parts because I just didn't have an idea of, I mean, I wasn't even, I don't know if anybody cares about this. I was just using the microphone on the camera. I wasn't even using like an external microphone, which you kind of have to do. So just little things like that kind of bug me now, but it was fun to do. It's a time capsule.
Yeah, of course, because you've stepped it up to the next level with this one. Unfortunately, a lot of times we don't see a lot of good productions when it comes to things that are coming out of the Coptic Church, in the sense of at least the quality of the technicality of the production itself, sound and video and things like that. So it's awesome that you've taken the time to put that together.
Thanks. I think, you know what, I showed this in New York in October, and I asked a question because we were talking about creativity, and I said, who here does something creative outside of their work or for their work? And very few hands went up. But then afterwards, when people came and talked with me, they said, yeah, actually, I want to do that stuff. So
Mm.
there definitely people want to. I think um, I'm not going to say we weren't encouraged to do it, but I just don't think it was a focus of our parents' generation, and rightfully so. I mean, that you're not you're not going to be a painter and move to the United States if you're a painter. So what did our parents focus on other stuff? And what I've also been told is that correct me if I'm wrong, but there's kind of two tracks in Egypt when it comes to education. People tend to go into a certain track if they get their certain scores. Otherwise, they go a different direction.
Yeah.
And correct me if I'm wrong on this, but anything that other direction is kind of seen as lesser than. And so,
In many ways, yes.
The hierarchy of education in Egypt.
yeah, yeah. And so that's interesting to me because even that bleeds into what people do in their personal lives as well. So I met somebody who said, yeah, I like baking. And I said, well, are you baking? Like, are you doing? No, I don't do it. Well, why not? Because to her, it was almost not, it's just not encouraged that even in her personal life, she would do something creative and artistic. So I think we needed more encouragement.
Yeah. Well, for all of those who are tuning in that haven't watched the show Abuna, just a quick 30-second elevator pitch, Andrew. Tell us what the series is about, and for those who haven't watched it, why it would be interesting for them to watch it. Because we have people that listen on this podcast that are Coptic, others that aren't. So first of all, the word Abuna means father. And I'll just let Andrew take it from there.
Yeah. So it's Abuna is a film series about a new priest in the church who is
No
trying to
spoilers,
navigate.
Andrew.
Okay. He Mina's his father in the end. Mina is his dad.
Oh, come on.
Sorry, I ruined it. Abuna is a film series about a new priest who is trying to navigate issues of culture and identity as part of a religious structure. And I think there are a lot of things in here that touch on many of the cultural things that we have experienced in our lives. There's scenes that take place in the 90s that I think a lot of people recognize. Hey, that was like my relationship with my parents growing up. There are elements in which people are talking about language and talking about food and a lot of touchstones, I think, for the Coptic community. And at the same time, I think what the film is really about is the connection between culture and spirituality, the interplay between the two of them. And that's something that I think people outside of the Coptic Church can also relate to. And they have. A lot of people who are not even Christian have said, yeah, this reminds me of my religious experience, where culture is a component of the things that we're doing. And my parents moved from China or they moved from Iran. And now we're having the same kinds of issues in terms of figuring out where culture fits in. So I think if you belong to a religious community, if you're an immigrant or your parents have immigrated, I think there are a lot of things in here that you would connect with.
I will just give Andrew kudos. He came and did a showing at St. Mark, DC. When was that? December?
November, yeah, November.
November.
Yeah.
And it was a great turnout, and people absolutely loved it. We had super, super thought-provoking conversation. And I was like really eager to bring Andrew on our podcast. Sorry, forgive me. But I was struggling because I wanted more people to see it. So once Andrew released, I was like, boom, we got to have this guy on because he's fantastic. And really, it's been a phenomenon so far on YouTube. We got like 70,000 views on the episode one. So I'm eager to see how the rest of the episodes will turn out because I think overall pretty good reception for episode one.
Yeah, yeah. Definitely better than I was expecting. I was not, it's surprising to me. If I'm trying to reflect on it, I do think, like Mina, what you said, we don't have a lot of media that's produced about like living, like being Coptic. So not necessarily the spirituality of it, but just my everyday life.
Yeah.
Uh, and I think this touches on some of those things. So I think that's
And the life of a priest, fascinating, pretty
yeah,
accurate in a lot of ways.
yeah, for sure.
So Andrew, what was the motivation? I guess give us a gauge of like what was your, I mean, you're a comms professor,
Yeah.
California. You have a lot of cool things that you're kind of putting together. If anyone has been on your YouTube page, there's a lot of other productions that you put together. So why this one? What was like the impetus for it?
Bomb
Yeah.
squads, you know.
Bomb squad. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So I don't love writing academic articles. It's not very fun for me. I've always enjoyed filmmaking, and when we were kids, we would make all sorts of fun films about whatever, and sometimes things about the church. You know, we do skits at retreats and things like that. And 2017, I was talking with the chair of my department, and he said, you can do film, as long as you show films at film festivals, you can get credit for that. So that started me on a process that really changed my life, which is that I tried to make a film every week in 2018. And so I wanted to publish it. I just wanted to get better. I wanted to figure out, how do I get better at audio, storytelling, editing, everything? How do I get better at all of it? So I was going to make 52 films in a year. And early on in that year, I was sitting with my friend George Henna. We were at breakfast, and I said, give me some ideas. What should I work on? And he said, you should do The Office, but in church. And we laughed about it. We just thought it was very funny. Like we both love The Office. It's such a fun show. And the idea of it being about people from church, I mean, doing a mockumentary would, to me, be hilarious. But I went home, I was driving home, and I thought, I don't know that I want to make the priest a fool. I think
Mhm.
it's inaccurate, and also I think that's kind of disrespectful, but it's also, like, number one, it's inaccurate. I don't think that really captures the situation. But the more I thought about it, I had some more conversations with other people who are, I think, more, let's say, risk averse, like my brother, for example. He will talk me out of things all the time. And I said, I want to think about this project. I want to do this thing where I look at the church through the lens of the priest. Like, how does a priest see it? And so I had more conversations. And then by the end of 2018, I started interviewing priests. I think Abouna Gregory Seraphim was the first priest that I interviewed in, I think, like November 2018.
Wow.
And it just continued from there. I interviewed, I think, about a dozen priests. I talked with many of their wives. Um, I spent a lot of time observing too. We're all part of the Coptic Church. We have things we can pull away, but as I teach my students in qualitative research methods, unless you're like intently observing, sometimes you don't know what's going on. So I started to watch my priest interactions. I watched other people's interactions a little bit more carefully, and we were ready to go. We were ready to start filming, and then in March 2020, that's when wanted to start filming, and of course, that's when COVID started. So that's we started filming again in October 2021, and it took about a year and a half to film and then finish up the editing. It's a long answer, but what I'm saying is it's been a long process. It's not something that it's not my full-time job. Um, it's nights and weekends, and it's one of those things where I just have to do a little bit every day. And I just really was inspired to do something about this organization or this community that I care a lot about.
Hmm. How much more motivated are you to finish the series now that episode one has been done?
I'm glad you asked that. So a year ago tomorrow, June 6th, I watched the whole thing for the first time with my wife and kids, and I hated it. I walked out of the room, and I honestly felt like I was going to get sick because I was going to show it 2 days later, and it was like nowhere near what I wanted it to be. I just felt like it was a hodgepodge of whatever. I just felt like it was terrible. And my wife really, like, helped me so much. She said, okay, let's sit down and let's do the work on this. So there have been moments like that where I'm like, I'm done with this. I don't care how much time I spent on this. I cannot work on this anymore. And then I will say, in the fall, last fall, I felt that sometimes where I was struggling with, like, we can go into this more if you want to. Broadly, I was struggling with getting approval from different places to show it in churches, because showing it outside the churches is a lot more challenging. for reasons I can get into. And so there were times where I'm like, this is too much. This is too much work. It's not worth it. I'm tired of doing things about the church. Um, and this is a personal thing. I don't want to be pigeonholed as somebody who makes things just about the church. Like I love making things about lots of different topics. And so I lost a lot of motivation to continue. And I'm like, I don't think I'm going to do more of this. And then after I did a couple of showings, particularly in New York and Davis and DC, I was like, hey, people actually care about this.
Hmm.
And it really motivated me to want to continue. Um, Bassem, who plays my dad in the 90s, and Dina Henna, who plays my wife, will like text me every 3 or 4 days. When are we filming? When are we filming? So seeing like them encouraging me makes me want to continue. So right now, I'm in the mindset of like I'm ready to go, and I'm restructuring and rewriting, and we're planning to start filming in August again. Uh,
Whoa. Okay.
so that's where we'll hopefully I'm doing shorter episodes. I can't do 60-minute episodes again. It's too complex. Um, I mean, I don't mean the story's too complex. I mean, just the logistics are too complex. So I have to do something shorter, like 20 minutes. That's probably better overall. So that's what I'm going to do
Yeah.
going forward.
Yeah, and these productions typically have teams like behind different editing and
Yeah.
all that. So it's pretty incredible what you've been able to put together for sure. Um, and I do want to talk to you about that little bit of uh, the tough times of it.
Yeah.
In a sense that there is always a little bit of resistance to sometimes things that might challenge us.
Yeah.
Especially when they are portrayed and we can touch it or see it or feel it.
Yeah.
Sometimes we can get defensive for right reasons or wrong reasons.
Mhm.
But I do think that having something to start the conversation, like Father Elijah was saying, is of utmost importance. Because I think what your episode 1 has done, um, and I personally know many people that loved it, and I know many people who were scared to recommend it because they're like, oh, why? What do we like? How would the church feel about this? Are we like kind of like what you were saying about the idea of your brother or someone be like, okay, let's more like taking a risk averse.
Yeah.
And the reality behind it is is why? Why can't we watch something, talk about it, and learn from it, and get some of that great feedback and move on and do better and learn to do better. And I think that's something that you have provided and you've given us that many other things have tried and could not achieve the same thing. So I am personally very thankful for that opportunity that has come because of this series and because of the episode that you've personally launched.
Thank you. I'm glad to hear that. I mean, it's not what I thought to do at first, and I'm glad that it's opened up that dialogue.
Yeah, I mean, I think for sure. I think the first time I watched it, I remember I watched it with Heva. Andrew had sent it to us. Um, and I immediately said to Heba, I said, this is fantastic. There's some stuff in it that I totally am like, oh, come on, man. But there's so many in it, so many things in it that's so great and so thought-provoking and so like so many layers beyond it, that really will spur a really great conversation. I was like, I got to bring him to DC, because I think it would really spark really great conversation. The Q&A that we had at our church
It was
that night was really, really something. I mean, it really opened up our community to a lot of questions about, um, and the way we did it was we had two priests and Andrew on the panel. So people asked the priests questions, particularly about how reflective this episode was, which has just really sparked really interesting conversation. And I think, Amina, I agree with you 1,000,000% that we have to have things, even if it's a little bit satire, there's some comedy behind it, that sparks people's thought processes and allows them to really evaluate whether or not, they've seen things in a certain light and maybe have pigeonholed things in a very narrow perspective. So, yeah, totally agree with you, man. So Andrew, I guess tell us, like, what were the things that sort of you walked away with when you were doing research that sort of allowed you to compile the episode in the way that you did?
Yeah. What I what I noticed from the interviews that I did was that the priests are all very, I mean, the priests I interviewed, I wanted to interview priests who were relatively young and relatively new to the priesthood, all things considered. And there was a sense of grace. There's very little complaining, but they had a lot to say about the challenges, which I appreciated. It was all kind of with a good heart. And that there's this feeling of, you walk into the job and you're learning. You're learning while you're doing it. So I'll tell you some of the critiques that people have had. One of the critiques is the priest looks incompetent. So, and I say, yeah, he is. He is incompetent. He's been on the job for a month. How could he know how to do everything right in the first month? So that's something that I pulled out, that the priests are like learning on the job. So when people expect perfection right away, that's challenging. I had a priest tell me that it took him 5 years before he learned like how to pray the liturgy the way he wanted to do it. It took a long time. And so I think it's important for people to recognize that the priests are human. They live their lives just like we do. And in addition to that, when I shared this one time, when there's a scene where the priest takes off his tunic, and people are like, oh, it's a priest with his tunic off, right? But priests are human. They take their tunic off at home. They're not wearing their tunic around the house. And so the idea of like the priests being real people and having a real relationship with their spouse and having a real relationship with their kids, and then on top of that, having to do this whole other thing that is a job technically, but I think we all know that it goes beyond being a job, right? It's a calling, it's a vocation. I mean, there's so much more to it than just saying it's a job. And so it's overwhelming. That's what I really took away, is that there's a lot going on, and it's hard sometimes to figure out what to do, which is something the priest says in the film. It's not easy. It's not like, yeah, we'll just do this. And, oh, well, you guys want this? Okay, we'll just figure it out. We'll just do it. You're always going to have people, and these are people who are sometimes your elders, who are asking you for something, and you have to say no to them, or you have to interpret what they're saying, and it's really challenging. So that was the big takeaway for me.
I mean, yeah, I think. Do you remember what the first thing that I said to you? I said, "Yeah, I feel like you made the priest look like a doofus."
Yeah.
And then as you sort of told me your rationale, I was like, but I totally can relate to him.
Yeah.
That's the thing. And then I said to you, the thing that you can't really show on camera is the supernatural grace
Yeah.
that a priest receives.
I remember that, and I've been thinking about it all the time.
Yeah, there's just this supernatural grace that priests receive, but that doesn't remove all those other factors, right? Like, yeah, we are, we are definitely servants of the church, and we've been mentored by the spirit of the church and discipled, but there's definitely a major difference between all of a sudden you're a layman and then you put on a cassock and you're expected to now know everything, know how to be a marital counselor, know how to give a great sermon, know how to pray a liturgy from beginning to end with the proper tune, know how to be a good dad still to your family and to your spouse, because you're adjusting to a whole different world, knowing how to deal with major crisis and trauma situations. So for sure, there's like, it's a steep learning curve. You go from pretty much like, I was a physical therapist before. You deal with a patient, you have that relationship with that patient, and then they're on their way. See you later. I discharge you, you're good to go. But now it's like there's no discharge. You're in a lifelong relationship with your congregation, and you're there through graduations, through marriages, through unfortunately really tragic experiences in their lives, and it's that roller coaster ride of life. So I think I really give kudos to you, Andrew, because I think that really sparked a lot of conversation, particularly for our community, because I think I was ordained maybe a little bit over a year
Yeah.
after you showed it. And I think everybody's like, "Oh, Boone Elijah, was this your exact experience?" I was like, yeah, week one, when everybody was kind of say hello to me and I'm like, it was very overwhelming. And still on Sundays, it's quite an overwhelming experience when you're coming out of liturgy and you have our church has 4,000 parishioners. So when you come out and it's like the mass volume of people with different things that they want to share with their dad, with their father, but the navigating of it. which is beautiful. Like I love it. I love being able to support our community. It's just the how and the grace that God gives you to be able to navigate it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that is not to say that you also, I mean, you have a good network of support, whether it's other priests at your church or the bishops or the hierarchy of the church, but that still doesn't take away how overwhelming it can become in certain situations.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
And there are a
that,
couple, I was going to say there are a couple things in this project that so far, I mean, in the first episode, are not reflective of what priests have told me. So, Abouna, you and I have talked about this before. The priest seems a little bit uncertain about his calling, and that's the one thing in this film that I did not get from the interviews. Every priest said, no, I'm certain about this. Um, but in the interest of storytelling, a priest who says, "Yep, I'm the man for the job," this guy right here. It's not a sympathetic character. And so there has to be a little bit of like he's not quite sure. He's being thrust into something that he's not sure about. And that may or may not change throughout the rest of the episodes. There's other things like having a support network that the right now the priest support network is his wife. It's he doesn't have there's no other clergy in this. Part of that's logistics. I could not figure out how to get a clergy member to be involved in this. So part of that just logistically, I couldn't write the story that way, but that's going to change. I mean, you're going to see other episodes where that does change.
Mm.
And so when Elijah, you're gonna like an episode. There's a priest retreat episode.
Oh
You're gonna
Lord. We should talk about that. We should
yeah,
talk.
let's talk about it. Yeah, yeah. So yeah, I think
But
there are some
my
things
first priest retreat, it was
yeah,
was recently. It was a beautiful experience, but it was just definitely I was like just getting adjusted, trying to figure it out,
yeah,
and
yeah,
learning to keep your mouth shut as the rookie.
yeah. I can understand that. But yeah, there's some things in here that it's storytelling. It's not going to be exactly, and there are some things, for the record, when I watch him back, I say I wish I didn't do it that way, or I didn't get that shot the way I wanted to, or that's the way she's talking is a little bit too critical of that other person. I don't love that, but that it's perfect is the enemy of good, and so, or what is it? Is that what you're supposed to say?
Yeah.
Perfect is the enemy of good. I wanted to get it done right. I can't refilm every scene exactly perfectly. So
And if you wait until you do, you never will, because you will
yeah,
always have people watching this with different opinions, different backgrounds, different feelings about things.
right.
So I think like you presented great content, but in my opinion, the most important thing you've presented is an opportunity to discuss and open up
Conversation.
conversation.
Yep.
Yeah,
Uh, because there are some things that should stay the same and there are some things that should be open to change. And I think this is a good segue into this
yeah.
as a part of the conversation. Do you feel in your research and filming this and as you prepared for it, you personally, um, did any of it change your perspective on the role of faith and culture in immigrant communities in America? Did your idea change over time?
Yeah, so I set out to, I mean, the first thing I had in mind is that the priest is being bombarded with people asking for different language in the liturgy because that's a universal thing. Any Coptic person can relate to that. I don't care if you go to an American Coptic church or if you're a church in Egypt, everybody can relate to the priest being asked to change the language use. And so I wanted to make sure that I was being somewhat fair, that it wasn't this thing of, well, the people asking for English are, you know, perfectly eloquent and stating their points, and then the people asking for Arabic are like backwards. Because I think sometimes my generation sometimes talks about it that way. I
Mm.
don't think that's fair because I think there's a lot of, I mean, I've definitely learned that there are a lot of reasons why, and we can get into the conversation about culture, where cultural elements like language do help us connect spiritually, not only with God, but with each other too. So there's a lot of value in that. I also learned a little bit, I mean, this isn't the question you're asking, but I want to tell you that
Please.
connecting with people like Abuna Elijah and other priests has changed my spiritual life dramatically. So just understanding that they are way more complex and I don't say interesting, that's not the right word, but they are interesting. But
Well, thank you, Andrew. Thank you so much.
there's more to it than just they're the priest who does the liturgy and tells me, I have to go to church. And just connecting with so many wonderful people has changed how I think about my my own faith and my relationship with priests and my relationship with God. So that's been really helpful for me. I that's been wonderful.
Yeah.
Um,
And a big shout out, this is not a spoiler, just a big shout out to all the, like everyone you've casted was awesome. But the aunts and uncles, uh, great casting.
Incredible.
Thank you. Well, my mom and my dad are in this, and my aunt and my
I
Oh,
uncle.
know.
no way.
Incredible.
Yeah. They
That's
really did a good job. I got to tell you a funny story. My mom said, Andrew, I want to play the woman who wants more English, and I want to play the woman who wants more Arabic. I said, Mom, you can't do both of the. No, no, no. I've seen movies where people play both characters. I'm like, Mom, this is not the Nutty Professor with Eddie Murphy. You cannot play both characters.
Yeah,
You can play one. So I went back and forth for a while. My mom decided, okay, I want to be the one who wants more Arabic. So she was very excited to be in it, and everybody did a great job. These are all amateurs. These are
yeah.
all amateurs. Bassem Shenouda, who plays my dad, is now taking acting classes. He actually brought his classmates to the first showing. I mean, that's awesome. But everybody else is an amateur, so I'm really impressed with them. They did
Yeah,
a good
no,
job.
absolutely. And the writing as well. Like I think every complaint that he had, like when I'm listening to him, I've heard this before. Like some uncle in my church has definitely said that in the
Yeah,
same exact way almost.
yeah, yeah,
So yeah, it's great. It definitely is a reflection of how much time you've taken to write and think about this and ponder.
yeah,
Um, and definitely, yeah, a great project. So thank you for presenting us with this
yeah,
opportunity.
yeah. Can I tell you something about the complaints, if you don't mind?
Please,
Um,
absolutely.
Something that's been interesting about this, about doing the showings and having people react to it, and I'm sure even, I mean, I'm sure you've heard this kind of thing as well. Somebody, we did a showing in the East Bay in the Bay Area, and somebody who I've known for a really long time, we get along really well. He's very connected in the Coptic community, and he said, Andrew, I really enjoyed this. Now that you've exposed the problems, why don't you say something, like nice about the church and show the goodness of the church? And I thought it was such a curious thing to say. I found it really interesting because I get it. I get how people would see this as, you're showing people complaining and showing how it's difficult and this is all bad. Show the good stuff now. Um, but we all know this stuff, right? We say that things are exposed, we all know that language is a challenge. We all know that sometimes we have issues with, bombarding the priest with too much information or too many requests. Um, we know that these things exist. And I think it's good for us to step back and say, yeah, like these things are here, right? It's not, you mentioned that it might open the door and people might be like touchy about talking about it. I think it's good for us to have the conversation and go, yeah, we understand this is a part of it, rather than kind of turning a blind eye and saying, yeah, no, it's perfect. Everything's great. So
Mhm.
I know there were a lot of complaints in there. And so maybe it was a little bit complaint heavy sometimes, or a couple of scenes where again, the priest is getting a lot of like phone calls and things like that. But part of it is like that's real for the priest. So I wanted to show that.
Hmm.
Uh, have you had a chance to show this to people from outside of the church and outside of the Coptic culture? And what has the reaction been to it?
Yeah. The first showing, actually, some of my students came and, they might be polite, but they said, wow, I really saw the warmth of your community, not only in the room with us, we were watching, but also the way in which the priest cares about his congregants and the way in which, people feel like they're connected. So somebody mentioned that they feel like this woman in the project or in the film, she apologized because she knew that this is a person she's going to go to church with week after week. And so she wants to make sure she has a good relationship. So um, I've had comments like that. I've had people tell me that they're the my friend Laura. She's the daughter of a Presbyterian minister, and said like this is exactly my dad's life. So I definitely had a lot of people outside the church connect or say they feel like they understand the community a little bit better.
Hmm.
And then, online now on YouTube, there's a lot of people who say, yeah, I'm not Coptic, but here's what I thought. So it's been nice to have a lot of people connect in that way
Yeah.
as well.
So that's interesting. So most of the people from outside of the community watching this, they focused more on the similarities within their communities to what you presented, rather than focusing on like the mishaps of the priest or like his new role. Like they've taken things in the broader context.
I think so. I mean,
Yeah,
at least in terms of the comments I've gotten or the comments I've seen, that's exactly what I've seen.
that's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I mean,
and
I think that speaks to the reality of the Coptic experience, right? Like I was at a graduation today for a number of youth from my church, and there was a Catholic priest who was sitting in the bleachers above us. And we probably rolled like 75, 80 people deep. Like, Coptic people, anytime
True
there's an
Coptic
event,
fashion.
we go hard, right? Like we come in strong. So he's like, "Hey, I just want to introduce myself. My name is Father so and so. Your community is incredible. Like the warmth that you guys have towards each other, I just have never seen anything like this." Um, and I was really taken aback by that because I know how special it is, but sometimes when you're in it, you kind of lose sight of how great it is.
Yeah.
Um, so I think, yeah, I think the episode highlighted some of the complaints, but there is so much beauty that I think it's still episode one. I can't wait to see how the rest of the series will pan out because there's so many great things I think the Coptic Church and the life of a priest really is. It's the greatest thing that any person could ever be called to be able to walk with people in their journeys towards their beloved. It's just such a beautiful thing. So, yeah, man. I mean, the complaints are real, but the grace and the gifts that God has bestowed upon us through this beautiful church is unbelievable.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. I do have better opportunities now to tell that, to show that. Um, because more people want to be involved now that they've seen it.
mhm.
So I will say some people are saying, I don't know if I want to be a part of this. And I think you kind of got me in the corner of the shot. Could you make sure I'm not in it? And I think now that people have seen it, there's a chance to show that warmth because you do need like mass, like critical mass to show that warmth sometimes.
Mm.
Or you can't film a graduation scene with 70 people unless 70 people want to be in it. So I'm excited for different opportunities for sure going forward.
Yeah, I mean, not to draw similarities or anything, but an example, you look at a movie like My Big Fat Greek Wedding, and you can see the success of
Mhm.
such a movie and how much it was loved and embraced because it highlighted a lot of things that people knew existed within their culture and they were happy to talk about them. I'm sure there must have been some other aspect of it that people like complained about, but it still garnered a lot of support and a lot of love because of how it kind of wrapped the issues and highlighted them. So that's definitely um, really interesting for us to see and to talk about.
Yeah.
I want you to. I don't know if you need to take off your actor hat and put on your professor hat, or you can
Okay.
keep both on at the same time. But I want to ask you a little bit more about the cultural component of this. Um, the integration of an immigrant church, because we are still fairly, and we've been here since the 70s, essentially in some churches, but we're still considered a fairly new first, second generation church in a diaspora in America as a Coptic Orthodox church. Um, what do you think, as that first generation immigrant church, how do we balance that preserving culture and what we call cultural identity
Yeah.
with adapting it to our new culture or the
Yeah.
American culture?
Yeah, I think it might be good for me to contextualize with a one of the scenes in the film. Um, I mean, it's a spoiler, but not. It's also not really a spoiler because I don't think
Tiny
it matters.
spoiler.
I
Okay.
mean, it's a spoiler, but it's like not really. It's not
Yeah.
going to change anything when you watch it. Um, we as a Coptic Americans, we are all experiencing something slightly different from each other in terms of where we are, but also something similar in that we're trying to figure out how to blend. It's called syncretism, right? When you take two different cultures and you blend them together and you try to figure out what is the right, thing. So for a lot of people, they don't want that. They don't want syncretism. They're like, no, we have our culture in church. It should be this, and then the culture outside of it should be totally different. We know that's not the case because we're using English, right? We've already taken some elements of syncretism and done that. Um, so um, that we as the point we're at right now is that we're talking about things like quote removing culture, right? Sorry to use air quotes. I apologize. But we talk about that. We talk about removing culture sometimes. We can't remove culture. It's not possible.
Mm.
So I've had a lot. That's one of the places of critique is that people have said, "Hey, you said remove culture. We can't remove culture." I'm like, well, that's a character saying that. That's what the character's saying because that's what we've said a lot. I'm trying to reflect what we say.
Mm.
Uh, you know, the filmmaker or the creator of the project does not believe everything the characters say. right? The person who wrote National Treasure does not think you should steal the Declaration of Independence. Okay. So like I don't necessarily think that we should remove culture. I don't even think it's possible, but I'm not going to say that there should be this language or that language. I mean, I have my feelings about it, but we're always going to have this conversation because culture is so complex and it involves things like language and it involves symbols and it involves artifacts and it involves rituals. And we have a lot of that in church. There's so much of that in church. So if you think about language, it's not just that we're saying words and we're looking for a translation. We're singing them. So you can't just sing something and then say, translate that for me. Oh, what did he say? Okay, yeah, I got it. It doesn't work that way because the language is literally embedded into the song, and we talk about songs as a way to worship God. So I can't just have somebody sing a song and then translate it for me and write it down. Got it. No, I have to sing the song as well to be a part of the worship. So it's really complex. It's not just we have cultural elements and let's see how we can change some of those things. I mean, it's embedded in how we worship. It's embedded in our relationship with God. So I think it's always going to be a challenge. I don't think it's ever going to change. I don't think we're ever going to reach a point at which we say, we did it, we figured it out. We did the culture thing. If you think about like the Catholic Church, or think about even what we would call a non-denominational church, they still have issues of culture. I mean, there are still cultural issues. They're just not as pronounced because their culture is more similar to the world around it. Whereas for us, you know, the clothes the priest wears, or the words we say, or the ritual, the things we do, the traditions we have, are just they're more. There's a more pronounced difference between what we do in church and what we do in our community, and what is done if you step outside and go, you know, walk down the street to CVS or to your school, or you know, to a sporting event. So I'm saying all this to say, like, we're still trying to figure this out, and I don't know that we're ever going to reach a point where we're saying, yeah, we did it, we figured out culture. I do think we're going to have different avenues for people. I think things like an American Coptic Church is an avenue, but I don't think we're ever going to figure it out completely.
Yeah, because I think it's really interesting, right? Because in America, we're a melting pot of cultures. So really, if a church is to reflect the culture around it, it's really multicultural. So then, okay, how do you have a church that is rooted in a very deep culture, very deep tradition, very deep history, and then bring that to a culture that is very multicultural? And how do you not allow the culture around it to dilute it, but also how does that culture not consume those around it? Right. So it's like this real struggle. Like I served in STSA for 10 years, which was, you know, one of the pioneer churches of bringing an ancient faith to a modern world. And now I serve in a church that is a much traditional church, but it's still, I think, way more multicultural than many other traditional Coptic churches. And I don't use the word traditional in terms of like removing the ancient faith. I'm talking about the cultural aspects of tradition, like the use of the Coptic language, the use of Arabic in services, the use of, you know, just chants or praises that are in Arabic that aren't necessarily liturgical. So that's what I'm saying. There's like, it's a big challenge, and I don't think we've been able to nail it on the head yet, because you can't cleanse a church from its culture because all those people come in with a culture. So if you have a church that's an American Coptic church, hypothetically, you have a Latino person, you have a Ethiopian person, you have an Egyptian person, you have a actual, you know, 5, 6 generation back American. How do all those cultures come in and blend in into the church? And it's a really fascinating thing to really try to address. And I think Abouna Bishoy Salem in Toronto has tried to address this. I think he's the priest that really was the pioneer of this sort of multicultural, multi-ethnic church. But I think the church is still, we're still in our adaptation of this and trying to figure out how to do this. And so it's a young experiment, so to speak.
Yeah.
And that's really interesting, the point that you both brought up here about the multicultural component, the melting pot that America is today. Because when the church first came to America, maybe in the 70s, things may have not looked like they do today.
Mhm.
America was not as much of a melting pot as it is today. So back then, um, morphing or adapting to a new culture or adopting elements from a culture here and there to kind of morph your own culture would have probably looked a little bit different than today, if we were to do that today. And that's something that needs to be considered, because at any point in the immigration process, as a family, as a church, as anything, as a culture, you have to, there's a stopping point where you ask yourself, um, will I totally reject the new culture that I'm in? And some people believe that is the case, that everything here is evil, everything from back home is good, and that's what we should keep. But if you go down that path, you become a survivalist. You are
Mhm.
only choosing to preserve what you have, and you're trying to protect it so much that you end up becoming a sect. Um, and the other extreme is if you completely choose to dissociate from everything that you know and completely embrace a new culture, um, and adopt that as your new culture. But you still run into the problem of you're adopting a new culture with its good and its bad too. A lot of times we miss that because there is a lot of times inherent biases in how we reflect and absorb and look at things. And by virtue, and this is something I'm not trying to generalize, but this is something that you see a lot in cultures where they come, anything American is great, everything non-American is bad. So by virtue of saying that, I want everything to look American, to feel American, to speak American, because everything else is bad. And that speaks to the point, Andrew, that you brought up, is that that would require removing culture.
Mhm.
And things don't work like that. You can't just simply remove a culture and embrace a new one, because you end up exactly where you started, because you have new good and new bad that you are taking on.
Yeah.
So, yeah, go ahead, Andrew.
I was gonna say this. You're right that it's this. We have this kind of dichotomy of
Mm.
um, this is good, this is bad,
Sides.
this is bad, and this
Yeah.
is good. And the fact is that culture is so complex, and especially in the United States, it's especially complex in the United States. You can go to a place like Japan; it's much more monocultural. Japanese culture is much stronger in terms of and more distinct than American culture is. I mean, part of that is the fact that America is so wide ranging. But yeah, if you've been to Japan, you know that it's a much more distinct culture. There are clearer boundaries around it. For us, we are not only now have first generation, second generation, third generation. So, my relationship to the culture of the church is different than my parents, who have been here longer than I have, but have also been in Egypt longer than I have. And then my kids, it's going to be different. And then, we tend to focus on the things that are very clear and easy to understand. So are there more speeding tickets given out or more reckless driving tickets given out? There's more speeding tickets because if somebody's speeding or not. But reckless driving is a little more qualitative. It's hard to determine what that is.
Mm.
So we kind of go, well, I'll just, speeding ticket is what I'm going to give out. It's the same thing with us with culture. We talk about language a lot. And I highlighted that, in the film. We talk about things like, this is a big one for my dad, being on time, right? So like starting on time, ending on time. I've heard at STSA, it's like you're starting on time, you're ending on time. There's no
Same at St.
variation.
Mark. Same at St. Mark. We're very, very strict on time. We try to keep a very
Yeah.
kind of
And there's a church in the Bay Area that I went to sometimes in college. It would end an hour and a half after it was supposed to end. And I'm going, well, this doesn't work for me because I have school and I want to get back to my friends and things like that. So it clashed culturally with me. So things like language and time, we can say, hey, yeah, we can choose this one or the other, but it becomes more complicated when we talk about things like beliefs, values. So like, what do we value and I'm going to separate out the theological aspect, but Egyptian culture versus American culture. What do we value? So Egyptian culture is very collective, right? Very, again, like we talked about the warmth of it. I don't think we want to lose that, right? I mean, we want to keep that, but it's complicated to figure out how you keep that without also, you know, staying in the way of some of the elements of American culture that might be beneficial to integrate into the church community. Things like some of the norms that we have, or the ways in which we socialize people into the church. How do we bring people in? We don't do a good job of that in the Egyptian aspect of it. It was not really a big part of the Egyptian aspect of Coptic Orthodoxy to socialize people into the church. Whereas, again, a place like STSA, or like what I used to do 10 years ago in our church, I'd hand out flyers in the back, like a thing a brochure to say, yeah, here's what our church is about. I think those are the things that are more complex and harder to figure out in terms of what it means to acculturate, to be a part of the American culture without letting it consume us.
And to
I'll tell
truly
you really, sorry, go ahead, Mead.
go ahead, no, go ahead.
I'll tell you a fascinating thing that I've been recently trying to figure out. So we've been getting like 10 to 12 Americans off the street showing up to our church on Sundays every week. And it's a fascinating thing because I will always, take time to speak to them, kind of get a gauge of where they came from, what their journey to the Coptic Orthodox Church was. And then I asked them after, like, what their liturgical experience was like. And they're like, oh my gosh, we loved it. I'm like, what about the parts that were different languages? And they're like, we particularly love that. It's like, huh, interesting. And usually it's followed up by, it delineates to us a difference in like what we do on a day-to-day versus what is happening in worship. And I was like, that is fascinating. It's not my scope of like my framework, but I'm seeing that, and you're seeing this emergence when you look at the data of Orthodox churches, particularly cultural ones, having this emergence of new membership, people coming in and wanting to join because people are looking for mystical experiences that don't necessarily are a little bit foreign to their ears, or a little bit foreign to their typical sensory experiences. So it's just a really interesting thing.
It is. I want to add to that aspect of it, and I'm not, it sounds like I'm pushing back. I'm not.
No, I know what you're saying. I know it.
I was talking with Abouna Ibrahim in Southern California, and we were talking about like the exoticness, right? So for some people, it's like, ooh, this is interesting. This is so different. And the difference brings them in. I mean, it's why my wife, was interested in me. I was the first Egyptian she ever met. So try that out. Young Egyptian men. Like, hey, check it out. King Tut here.
I'm a pharaoh.
Yeah, exactly. So, that will draw those people in, right? There's a little bit of like self-selection that they want that. Do we owe it to the people who want to walk into our church and say, I want that faith, but I want to understand it 100%. I don't want the Egyptian elements. I was surprised in the church in Detroit, Farmington Hills outside of Detroit. Actually, the first time I've been to a place where there's mostly converts, or like many converts, but they seem to be very much, it wasn't culturally Egyptian though. I don't know if this makes any sense. Like, they weren't interested in the Egyptian culture. They were very much interested only in the faith.
Yeah.
It's not wrong to be interested in the Egyptian culture. I was taken aback in a good way by that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's why I think you said what was best earlier when you said there is pathways for different people.
Yeah.
And I think the key thing is to understand that the Coptic Church is beyond a language and beyond a collective group of people. It's an Alexandrian faith that was rooted and fought for and preserved through suffering. So I think that draws a lot of people in. A lot of people are very much interested in the story of the 20 martyrs. So yeah, it's so multifaceted in the reasons why people come and join a more ethnic church historically. And to address that question in a singular way, I don't know if there's an answer. Like I've been pondering this question now for close to 18, 19 years at this point. I really don't have an answer to it. Because it's a fascinating one.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's really interesting because a reflection on everything that we are today uh, goes into a lot of these points. And if you talk about culture, and if you talk about the church, and if you talk about faith, and you talk about spirituality, by virtue of them being so close together, there will be some elements, you can still hash them out, but there is some sort of intersectionality that in order for you to be able to separate them, or to at least to morph them into what you want it to be, you have to do a lot of studying, self-examining. Um, to Andrew's point is, well, you do have to understand the American culture. And if you're going to step into America, you have to understand the American culture, not to take everything that it offers, but understand it. And the way you understand it is by doing that. You can be passing out flyers, be integrated in a community, but you cannot do that alone. You have to do that through understanding Orthodox faith first, uh, because you can view culture through an Orthodox lens, because culture is not the identity of the church. Her faith is the identity. The way culture comes into play is more like a garment on a person, as opposed to the person himself or herself being different.
Mm.
And we risk a lot because we say, okay, we don't know what we think we know what American culture is. Most of Egyptians don't step out and really integrate into American culture. We think, just because of our lack of research or interest in pursuing it, we might think American culture is Christian evangelical movements. That is American to us. And whatever the Christian evangelical church says is what we believe too. And that's not true. Nothing against the evangelical church, but we are a different church. We're an Orthodox church. We don't know our faith, right? So we choose to see a different culture, and we think that this is our faith when it's not, because we don't know our faith. I think and you know what, Abouna, Father Elijah, I'm not really sure. It's really interesting also that this is the, and I really haven't thought this out well to be able to talk about it maybe in length, but it's interesting that Coptic comes before Orthodox, because we identify a lot with culture, essentially. We are an Orthodox church before and after everything. That's our faith is Orthodox. Our theology is Orthodox. And Coptic is how she's dressed, right? That might be a little bit culturally different from the Greeks, who are also Orthodox. Obviously, aside from some theological yeah, differences. Let's not use the Greeks. Let's use the Indian.
Use the
Here's the
Syrians.
Syrian, right? To make the analogy work, right? They bring different elements in that are different. So I think we do ourselves a huge disservice by not knowing our faith, firstly, in order to truly be able to bring an Orthodox way of life into a new culture, and then be able to morph that into who the church should look like here in America today, in that melting pot. Because the church should always be recognized by her children. She should never look too different that she's become, is irrecognizable a word?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Unrecognizable, yeah.
Unrecognizable.
Yeah.
Become completely unrecognizable. That then you've changed the identity of the church. You can't do that, right? You have to preserve her faith, but have her be inviting enough so that people from outside of that culture can find her familiar too. So yes, Father Elijah, it's good that people are attracted to a language that they haven't heard before, even from an exotic point of view in the beginning. But you also have to be able to cater to those who are different and speak differently, and speak to them as well, finding that balance in between.
For sure, because I mean,
Yeah.
I think that's a struggle of mine. I mean, I
Right.
grew up in a heavily Arabic speaking church, so I'm more inclined to an all English service. It speaks to me when I can pray and understand every single word that I'm saying, and I will, so for sure. So I think what you hit was the nail on the head, Mina. Like, we need to know our faith, the roots of our Orthodox faith, in order to be able to address these cultural nuances. Because I think if we don't know our faith, then the byproduct is we're trying to address it based on a subjective approach. What I feel, what I like my brother's so funny. He's like, man, y'all got rid of all the Arabic in your church. He's like, I love the Arabic. The Arabic is just like speaks to your heart, you know? And my brother doesn't speak Arabic, like very little. Like, but he just, there's something um nostalgic about it. It's
Yeah.
like when you grow up and you remember your childhood priest praying in Arabic, it does something to you. It brings back a certain memory for you. So I think some of us are really drawn and held on to a lot of things that are nostalgic for us, but we're not considering it from a pastoral lens. We're not considering, have we first understood our faith in order to figure out how to navigate culture
I
versus,
think, oh, go ahead.
go ahead, Andrew.
I was going to say, I think this is where it's good to talk about the fact that in our church, we love our identity, and culture and identity are flip sides of the same coin. And so your brother loving Arabic, he's not the only person who doesn't speak Arabic who loves Arabic, because when we grow up, we form certain bonds with particular elements of our culture, and they become who we are, right? It becomes part of me. So this is now who I am. So
Hmm.
I go to a place, I don't speak Arabic either, but I do love when I walk through the hall and I hear Arabic and there's Egyptian food. Like I love that because it's mine. It reminds me of childhood. I like that aspect, um, because it's become part of my identity. It's the same reason why I eat a hot dog when I go to a baseball game. I could eat something else, but it's like I could eat a hot dog. I'm a baseball fan, right? I'm gonna eat a hot dog. I'm gonna have sunflower seeds. We want that because it defines who we are. And that's where I think it gets complicated, because I think sometimes the things that we think are, well, I don't know if I'm speaking out of turn here. Sometimes I think the things we think are actually part of the faith, not we, but some people, me, that we think are part of the faith, but maybe actually are cultural, but we can't figure out which is which because of the identity aspect. So in other words, there's culture and there's theology, and there is a little bit of overlap because there are ways in which an example would be the way the church is built, right? So the way the church is built, there's some sort of theological, structured, right? The architecture of it, or the use of incense. It's cultural in a way, but it's also theological. So and like we said, the worship, like the language, it's cultural, but it's also theological. It's sometimes hard to figure out some things, like which one do they belong to.
Hmm.
And I think what ends up happening is that we often paper over all of it and go, well, it's just part of my identity. It's just part of who I am. And we don't think critically about which is which. I'm going to bring something up. Please stop me. Feel free to stop me. We were in Boston and we were talking about a little bit about like what's part of what. And people said, what are some examples? And I looked to Abouna Samuel Hannah. I said, can I talk to you? Yeah, just go ahead. Say whatever you want to say. I said, like drinking. And he goes, no, we're not talking about drinking. No, we're not talking about drinking. Because, if you look at other Orthodox churches, it's not part of their tradition to abstain from drinking completely. But it is part of ours. And so does that come from a theological basis? Does it come from a cultural basis? And then what does it do for people who are, let's say, like me, who grew up in the United States, who see a hard line stance towards something and go like, that's kind of that. I don't like that. Even I don't feel like it's part of the church, but maybe it is part of the church. I don't really know. I don't really understand where that fits.
Hmm.
So apologies for bringing up a controversial idea, but
No,
Not at all.
yeah, no, I think that's a good one. I mean, I think we'll always say all things are lawful, but not all things are beneficial, you know?
I'll wedge one in between the two, Andrew. You spoke about the theology and you spoke about culture. There is a silent one that is often misunderstood and often attributed to one or the other. It doesn't really belong with one or the other. And that is a theological opinion. There
yeah,
is there is theology.
Eologumena.
Yeah, exactly. And
yeah,
then there is theological opinion, and then there is culture.
yeah,
So the church will never wake up tomorrow and say God is not Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. That'll
right,
never happen because that is part of the core theology of the church,
right,
right? Then the church developed theological opinion in order to nurture her children.
yeah,
Something like we should fast for 9 hours before we take communion, right?
Right.
That is a theological, or we use incense in this particular way. The church probably will not change that, but the church could wake up tomorrow and say it's no longer 9 hours, it's 12 hours, right? There is freedom. The church has liberty to do that. I'm not saying the church will ever do that. I'm just saying that is part of a theological opinion, right? And then outside of that, there is culture, right? Everything that culture brings on, that we, having been in Egypt for so long, influenced by so many cultures over the years, religions over the years, that kind of seeped some elements into us as people, and we brought that into the church. There is heavy cultural things to synthesize there too. So how do you separate the three and know which is which? You have to know your faith. You have to know what is the true Orthodox, authentic, because that's kind of the theme for the season that we're talking about here. What is the authentic Orthodox Christian faith? And when you know that, you have enough discernment, at least for yourself, while still being obedient. Not saying that you can go rebel because tomorrow you disagree with something, but at least have the discernment for yourself to know what can I accept, what do I embrace and love, and what can I disagree with but still accept it and be obedient to it, and what needs to be changed, because that still remains a question, because we can't just say nothing needs to be changed. That's not the truth. The church in the first century was Jewish, and then the church realized that it needs to open her doors to her Gentile children, and the church can no longer be Jewish. So the church changed some things, right? That's a cultural change in order to be open to others. Just like a mother truly taking care of her children, to her younger child, she looks one way and speak to him a certain way. And as he grows and continues to recognize his mom as he gets older, he recognizes that she's the same woman. She's the same mom he's always had, but he speaks to her differently. She teaches him differently. Just like the church teaches a kid to pray differently than an adult. Why can't the church deal with someone in Kenya differently than someone who's in Egypt? She should be able to do that without losing her identity, because her identity, true identity, is Orthodox and in Christ.
I'll tell you something that I think is really positive. I've heard about, and I've seen some elements of efforts by certain dioceses and certain bishops to address exactly what we're talking about, where how do we separate things like theological opinion and theology and culture, to recognize that in some cases, some theological opinion, there's some that's maybe, like, we can call it theological opinion that's closer to the theology, and some that's maybe about some of the rituals. An example would be something like when a male versus female child is baptized. So things like that, thinking about, is that a theological opinion that is rooted in the theology and needs to be there, or is it something closer to the outside? There are some efforts by bishops in the United States to address those issues, to not address to change. I'm saying to say, we need to think about this. And I applaud that in a big way, because for us to simply say, let's talk about it, I think is a huge first step.
Yeah, absolutely. And these are the things exactly that fall in between, that people can easily mistake for one or the other. And it requires, a true, a desire to truly reflect on the real identity of the church and to represent her well, and not being afraid of saying the church is always going to be who she is, even if to you today she may look slightly different, or she might have today she's playing sports and she's wearing sports attire. Tomorrow, I mean, even the church, we literally dress the church differently in seasons of the church, right? During Pascha, Holy Week, or Passion Week, the church is dressed in black. During Resurrection, and when we're happy that Christ has risen from the dead, the church is dressed in white. During the annual times, the church is dressed in red. The church is literally dressed in different colors to represent different things. Some of these things we shouldn't be afraid, but we should be able to recognize that the true identity is in a true Orthodox way of life. It's not really just in the cultural things that we tack on, but like you said, Andrew, sometimes it's so hard to separate the two.
Yeah. How old are you? How old are you all? Can I ask that question? Can you share that out loud?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm 39.
39,
I'm 36.
36. Okay. I'm the reason I'm thinking about this is because this Sunday we start our church basketball league here in Northern California.
Mhm.
And I've been running it now. This is our 19th season. We've been doing it since 2005. The only year we missed was 2020. And we've been thinking a lot about culture because we had some cultural issues last year. We had a couple players who felt like like they were bringing in cultural elements that don't fit with what we want for a church league. And they were things that to them seemed, this is okay because this is what I see regularly. It felt really good to me. It's things like, just being too like threatening people, stuff like that. Getting in shoving matches and and the like. But one thing that I find very funny about this league is that I belong to a team of people who are 35 and up. We're called the Pacific Desert Fathers. That's our we play very old and we play very slow. And it's interesting how sometimes the younger people in the league will say like, well, we should be doing this, we should be doing this. And it's like very like, we got all these opinions. And then sometimes we sit there and go, yeah, we know, guys, we've been doing this for a long time. And so there's a little bit of I understand how the church feels sometimes. When I say the church, I mean like the synod. It's like, guys, we've been doing this for a long time. You guys want all these little changes. We know, but just like trust us that like we're managing this thing relatively well. At the same time, it's good to listen to another generation, just hear their opinions about things. Anyway, that's what's on my mind because I was playing basketball before this. I got to get in shape. I had hip surgery in October, so might as well be 60 years old.
No, but
Yeah,
but go ahead, Father Elijah.
no, I think it's a really, really important question. I think I remember being young and wanting to like revolutionize the Coptic Church and be like, we got to do this, we got to do this, we got to do this. And like, I always used to be so confused that the people that were older, that are really respected and weren't as passionate as I was. And now that I've become one of them, I'm like, and all these younger, more enthusiastic, young adults are coming in like, we should do this, we should do this. There's always like a part of you that is like, you want to encourage,
Yeah.
you want them to be inspired, but at the same time, you want to be like, we've been there, we've done that, it didn't work. Just listen, just like take the advice of of those who came before you, your predecessors, so to speak. Or like, we've done this and maybe y'all can do it a little bit different. So I think there's definitely a wisdom in seeking counsel. And I think that's actually a big problem in our culture in America is we have thought that old isn't gold. And most other like societies, like Japan,
Yeah.
they revere their elderly.
Mhm.
It's a real like older is a sign of wisdom. So that's a
And-
cultural thing that's not really prevalent. It's actually like there's a real thing is like age discrimination in workplace where they push people out at a certain age because it's like you're not as innovative, you're not as with it, you're not as like, but I don't know, like the greatest problem solvers are often the people that have had the most problems in life and a longevity of it and navigated it. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's very true. I think it's really important for the younger generation to trust in the wisdom of the older generation. And like Andrew said, for the older generation to be able to be open to maybe learning a thing or two from a younger generation from their passion. It's always a good reminder to see younger people are passionate and want to change things. It makes you at least stop and question, why do they want to change it? How does it impact them and affect them? And does it really need to be changed? Or why is it there in the first place?
Because you have a problem now. You have a problem in which you have two people living in the same household and are totally different cultures. And until you have the young and the old sitting and having a conversation and trying to really learn and understand from each other, there's always going to be people speaking past each other. And we're never going to be able to.
And you mean that literally, like
literally.
Yeah, in households
literally.
now, there's
I have, somebody who immigrated to this country maybe 15 years ago, and has a 15-year-old,
Right.
you
Right.
know, or 16-year-old. That child is American in their mindset.
Mm.
And that person may be coming from the Said or Upper Egypt or something like that and has a very different mentality. So there is this clash that happens in these households. And here I am, this American priest, trying to navigate that. Because I understand the culture of Egypt, even though I was born here, because I've interacted more and more with people and spent a lot of time in Egypt. But it's just it's this, we can't see eye to eye on things. There's a disconnect. And I think that's the real danger. The real danger in the long run is if we don't have these open, honest conversation, which is what like Abuna has led us to do, the series, um, and then we really will never address the deep rooted issues that are manifesting across all multicultural and specifically cultural church settings, where you have, because we're no longer an immigrant church anymore. We're no longer a church that is we've now become, by and large, a church that is predominantly Americans, kids that are born here, families that raised kids that are now been in this country. Like, predominantly, the bulk of the church membership is Americans. Yes, you still do have an influx of immigration that's happening. So until we have these open, honest conversations, it's going to constantly be this battle of the world, so to speak.
Amen to that.
And it's a very analogous to some of the other things that happen in life, like parenting. You're constantly battling and trying to figure things out together, and having the dialogue is helpful. Politics is the same way.
Yeah, man.
You know, and in some ways, the approach I try to take with my kids is I say we need each other. You know, I need you to tell me when I'm being too stubborn about something.
Yeah.
And you need me to slow you down. I mean, my kids and I are much closer together mentally than I think I was with my parents. But yeah, we need each other. We need the older, let's say the previous generation, the more experienced generation to give us that experience, and we need the more youthful generation to give us that energy.
So that's a great actual point, Andrew. So yeah, your children are how old?
15 and 11.
15 and 11.
Yeah.
And so your kids are at the exact age where a big bulk of Egyptians immigrated into this country during
Yeah.
the revolution. So
Yeah.
you are raising kids in the church at the same time with people that are almost the exact same age as you, but are coming from a very different world.
Yeah.
So that presents itself a challenge. It's like, okay, we have two parents who have kids the same exact age, and the kids are pretty much identical, but the
Yeah.
parents are very different in how they want to address how they raise their kids.
Yeah.
What is okay, what's not okay. It's a cultural problem.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
And to that point, that's where having different avenues can be helpful. I mean, the church I go to is not Americanized, but it's somewhat Americanized. And then there's churches 30 minutes away, 40 minutes away that are more Egyptian. And it kind of, people can find where they can connect with God the best. And yeah.
yeah. Great conversation. Closing
Yeah.
thoughts, Andrew.
Let's see, probably Mavericks in 6. I'm excited. I'm excited for the NBA final.
Yeah,
Gonna be great.
I'll agree to that. I got to go to one of their games, not the playoffs, but regular
Yeah.
season. It's a pleasure to
Right.
watch. It's
Yeah,
awesome.
they're really cool. Yeah.
I think it's gonna go 5. Mavs in 5.
You think so? I mean, because
Yeah.
Celtics are favorite, I believe.
No, man, but
Luka.
Mavs in 5.
Luka, right? Yeah.
Yeah, Lucas too.
Yeah.
Anyway.
I think it's good for us to just observe as much as we can. And I'm always trying to encourage people to be cultural tourists. So you go somewhere and you just take in as much as you can. And I think it's good for us to do that even in the places where we think we know. So I encourage anybody who's listening, when you're in church on Sunday or Friday or Saturday, see what's going on around you. Understand it. Understand how people are interacting with one another. Understand why they do it, if you can, and in what ways we can improve without affecting the core of our beliefs. To me, I think if we're all observing culture more, understanding people better, I think that's going to be the key to figuring out how things can, proceed the best as we go into the next, 10, 20 years, and we have another generation of people who are born in the United States.
Yeah.
No, absolutely. Amen to that. It's important to ask why something is there in the first place and understand why it's there. Um, and then you can still make a judgment call if you want it changed or not. Because if you don't understand why it was there in the first place, then how can you just ask for it to be changed?
Yeah, that's a great,
Um,
right.
so totally agree with you. Father Elijah.
I will actually also encourage our people to be more in tune with the culture around you outside of the church, like you said, Andrew. Like when you travel, take note, learn, try to listen, try to see what other people are doing. It just enhances your worldview and enhances your ability to actually bring the gospel to all people. Because if you don't understand the world around, you'll never be able to bring the gospel to all people. And the gospel is the good news. So why wouldn't we want to share the good news with every single person that we encounter and want to, bring the healing and the transformation that Christ has brought to each and every one of us? So I think oftentimes because we've become so ethnocentric, we've just pigeonholed ourselves to just seeing things through the lens of Egyptians. Um, so yeah, look, like I love that, Andrew. I think that was a really great point. So yeah, go out, visit museums, learn from people, have conversations with people that are drastically different from you. Learn, ask questions, because that's the only way we'll be able to actually minister to the culture and the community around us with the ancient faith that we have been bestowed by, again, the suffering of our forefathers. So Andrew, we appreciate you, man. We love you. We, are big fans of Abouna, and I can't wait for episode 2. I don't know, you, Mina, what do you think?
Absolutely. Me too. And if you're listening and you're tuning in tonight and you have not yet watched it, please do yourself a favor.
I already
Go.
posted. We posted in the
Oh,
Facebook link already, so you have the
nice.
link in the Facebook, and we'll also post it on YouTube. And then we'll put it in the show notes on the podcast, so you can be able to click on it. We
Yeah.
encourage you very much to watch it.
Yeah, check it out. And just as important, ask questions, have conversations with your friends and your priests and your parents about it. It's good to be in a place that we can kind of have the opportunity to speak our faith freely and to reflect on it and reflect on our culture freely. It's an opportunity that we often take for granted. So make sure you do use it. Andrew, thank you so much, man. It's such a great honor and privilege to have this conversation with you today.
Thank you all. I feel the same way. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
Thanks,
thanks a
Andrew.
lot.
Appreciate you.
Right.
And check us out on Apple Podcasts. And again, don't tell Alexa to play our Reintroduction podcast for you. Just, move your fingers, check it out on Google Play or Apple
Spotify, the
Podcasts or
whole nine.
Facebook, Spotify, anywhere. And please send us messages. Tell us what you think. If you have any questions, ideas for episodes, we'd love to hear from you. We love you. Thank you for always being great supporters for everything that we do. And we'll leave you until we see you next time. Good night.